Okay, I guess we're live. Aiqui, friends and relatives out there. My name is Greg Maston. I'm a member of the Yurok tribe. I'm also a descendant of the Hupa and the Karuk people. I want to thank you all for joining us today and talking about this very important topic about indigenous-led conservation and their viewpoint and our tribal nations conservation initiatives. I know that when we talk about conservation, we have different definitions about it and different meanings behind it. Today, we want to share with you a little bit of viewpoint from the tribal perspective and then the steps that we've taken at NAP to help support tribally led conservation. So I currently serve as the Vice President of Tribal Nations Engagement at Native Americans in Philanthropy. And as a Native person, and though I can't speak for all Native people out there, I can say that there is a deep connection to the land and to the waterways and the critters that we share this world with. I myself, I've grown up on about 4 different reservations throughout my life, mostly on the Hupa Valley and the Yurok Reservation. And I recall as a young boy, getting up early in the morning and in the Hupa Valley, you're surrounded by the mountains and the trees. And just looking out and thinking how amazing and beautiful the mountains were, and thinking about what those mountains represent. There's old stories there, there's old trails, there's sacred places, there's places of ceremony, places to gather medicines, and places where we hunt and where we fish. And then in that same valley, there's a river that runs through the valley. And the water, when the water level is just right, it's just an amazing, rich green color, and it truly brings life to that community. And it also provides a pathway for the salmon that the people rely on. In the summertime, we'd have a summer run of salmon where we'd catch salmon and we would smoke them and then we would can them to make sure that everyone had plenty for the winter. Make sure that my grandma had salmon and my aunties and my sister, and really just living, practicing sustainable ways, living in harmony and in balance with our environment. And we've also seen what can happen when things are out of balance with our environment. In the same area, we've seen devastating fires over the years ravage our lands. In the summer, we've seen low river levels that have really disrupted the salmon, and the dams that in some cases have destroyed complete salmon runs. In 2002, we had the fish kill, which saw over 70,000 adult salmons die because they couldn't survive in that warm water environment. And so when these things happen to us, it affects us, and frankly, it hurts us. So this connection that we have to the land and to our waterways and the critters, it's much more than just about the land or about the salmon or about the waters. This land is our history. It's where my grandparents have been buried, my great grandparents, my great, all the way back. The waters, they have always been there for our people. There's a sacred trust and responsibility to those waters that we hold. And so we want to share some of that with you all today. We've been doing listening sessions across the nation, hearing from tribal leaders, hearing their views on conservation, what it means to them. And because of that, we have been able to develop something new and exciting. We now have at Native Americans and Philanthropy, Tribal Nations Conservation Pledge and Funding Collaborative that we're excited to share with you all. And if you didn't see the press releases on Tuesday, we announced at the White House Conservation Summit a unprecedented level of support from some of our core partners. 15 foundations came together and made a pledge to support tribally led conservation work. And that pledge, the combined total is $102.5 million. So over $100 million committed to supporting tribally led conservation work. So it really is a dream come true. We're so thankful of the support that we received for this collaborative, through this collaborative. And we're just excited to see the work continue to work to support our communities. And talking with some of the tribal leaders, I think there's one point that we really want to drive home, at least from my perspective. Native people have always been the caretakers of this land, had this deep connection to the land. Over the years, we've seen policies and priorities come and go. We've seen administrations come and go. But Native people's commitment to that land has never wavered. We've always been here to protect it and to preserve it. We'll continue to be here to protect it and to preserve it. And we're thankful and grateful for the partnerships that we're able to forge today to work with us to protect and preserve it. And so I'm thankful that you all could join us today, and I'm excited for what we're going to hear from our panelists. And I look forward to working with many of you out there to support the environment on behalf of all of us. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Steph Poston, and just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Greg. Good to see you, and congratulations on the work that you all have done to not only protect all living things today, but for future generations with this collaborative funding effort. That's incredible. As Greg said, my name is Steph Poston. I am coming to you from the Pueblo of Sandia, a tribe immediately north of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm the owner of Poston Associates, a full-service communications firm, and I've been working in Indian country for well over 20 years. So it's my honor and pleasure to be moderating this session today and to really just be on the cusp or the newly announced amazing collaborative that was just announced, as was mentioned on Tuesday. I just got back from the All Pueblo Council of Governors, where Chaco Canyon is on the list of items to be discussed. So everywhere you turn, when you're working with tribes, they're working to make sure that we are protecting and honoring the lands of our ancestors, and for all that it brings for us and all of humanity, basically. So welcome. We're excited. We have an amazing panel, and I'd like to invite each of them up one by one just to kind of give a brief background. And first, I will start with Joel. If Joel can come to welcome. If you want to give us a brief background.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. Tatsalaf Kimima Kala Tiwama, Inamunik Was Tamiopsayo, Nimi Putimki, Joel Moffett, Soya Putimki. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Steph, for and Greg for opening us up, and welcome to everybody. My name is Joel Moffett. I'm a citizen of the Nez Perce tribe. I serve as the Director of Environmental and Special Projects at Native Americans and Philanthropy. I have been with the NAP team for about 16 months now. I am zooming in from my home for the last 8 years here in Suquamish, Washington, on the Suquamish tribal lands. Prior to joining NAP, I served my own tribe as an elected leader, treasurer and vice chairman for the Nez Perce tribe. as well as working on natural resources policy and coordinating the Northwest tribes at affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. And so I'm just excited. As you said, we're right on the heels of a huge announcement and investment in this work that tribes are leading and have always led. So it's just exciting to be here with a bunch of great folks, my colleagues and friends on the panel. And thank you for leading us on this in this hour and a half, Steph.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I'd like to now invite up Lisa, if she can give us introduce herself, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be here. After several days in Washington, D.C. with my colleagues at NAP, this is such a wonderful way to close out a successful week. So I'm Lisa Jacuzny. I am the Director of Programs for Biodiversity Funders Group, a mouthful of a name, which is really a membership association or an affinity group for funders that work in the biodiversity space. And I think we'll get into why that word is such a meaningful word in some ways, and also means very little, right? So I'm just delighted to be here. I'm zooming in from an island in the Salish Sea, so just a little bit north of Joel, up on San Juan Island, and I'm eagerly awaiting the camas, which will bloom right outside my window, which is was a wonderful surprise when I first moved here. I've been in and out of philanthropy for a couple of decades, and the day after I started this role was the day that The Atlantic published the article, "Should we return the national parks to the tribes?" And I thought, wow, okay, this is in the drinking water, and it's very exciting. So I'm looking forward to talking more about it, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, Lisa. Our other panelists now, if I could invite up Shawn to introduce himself.
Thanks, Steph. I am Shawn Watts, citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, born and raised there until I went to college just north of Steph there in Santa Fe, New Mexico at St. John's College. So I'm envious of Steph because she has unfettered access to chili on a daily basis.
So true. So true.
That's so envious. I am the U.S. Strategy Director for the Christensen Fund and have been in philanthropy almost, I think, 1 month less than Joel. So you got some new folks here, but I actually think that's really great because a lot of these new things that you see happening, including that announcement that was made at the White House, is really the product of people coming in from outside of philanthropy and looking at it from a lens that wasn't the sort of inside baseball, that philanthropy doing the same things the exact same way they've always done them, really shaking things up in a way that's made some real progress in a really short period of time.
Yeah. I double click on that green chili at the All Pueblo Governors Council meeting. They had breakfast burritos. Of course, the options were red or green chili. It was amazing. So welcome, panelists. I mean, just really, again, just really honored for your sharing of ideas and how we might inform our listeners today about opportunities to help and support the work that you all announced on Tuesday. So I want to just get into one of the first questions, and I'll direct this first question to Joel and Shawn. So starting with Joel, as Indigenous men and leaders, how was your cultural perspective informed the work that you do regarding conservation?
Thanks for that question, Steph. As Greg mentioned, we have different definitions of conservation in different communities. The non-governmental organizations and foundations and tribes and general public have different understandings of what conservation is, and we didn't call it that when I was growing up, in the tribal communities. We were out on the landscape, on the rivers, exercising our treaty fishing, hunting, and gathering rights. And so that's what I grew up with my father, my uncles, my aunts, my family. And they instilled in me the obligation and the responsibility of really taking care of those gifts and those medicines that the Creator provided. And I think that's common amongst a lot of tribes. You know, we have 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. So as Greg said, we do not speak for all of them. And I only speak from my perspective as a Nez Perce man. But we share a lot of commonalities in the respect for that relationship with the land, with the water, with all those gifts, those medicines that the Creator provided. And so that was instilled in me as a young boy. And that covenant, it's a reciprocal relationship. Those gifts were provided for us so that we were able to sustain our communities and our ways of life for thousands of years. And in return, we have to take care of them and their homes. And so that, you know, I didn't know the word conservation when I was growing up, but that's what the definition from an indigenous perspective is. And so when I am now in a professional and in this field and working with tribal leaders and connecting them with foundations and nonprofits who share some of the same goals, it's really important to bring that tribal, that indigenous perspective and view to it, because that really goes to the heart of protecting those ecosystems, because it goes back to protecting those medicines and honoring that obligation and that sacred responsibility that we have to take care of these of these gifts, so that they're going to be there for our future generations. Because this is, you know, like something that, as Greg said, you know, we've been stewards of this land, these waters, all the critters, as Greg said. I like when he says critters. And so we want them to sustain our communities and our way of life into the future. You know, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old at home here, and it's so inspiring and heartening to take them out and continue that tradition, get them out on the rivers, get them out in the mountains, and understand the value and the obligation that we have to take care of these resources, because they've taken care of us for thousands of years. So that's kind of like formulated my perspective on protecting and restoring these sacred spaces and sacred beings that have sustained us. And so I think that is also been reflected in a lot of the tribal comments when we've gone out to Indian country and met directly with tribal leadership and tribal members and staff. We're hearing a similar message of how the ways of life of our individual nations are intricately tied with the land, the water, and these species. And so that just goes to what's in our heart and what's in our blood. So that's my perspective. And like I said, I think it's similar to a lot of other tribes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And like what it came out for me was that whole generational piece of how you went out to the land with your relatives and how you're doing that now with your children. And typically that's how I know our tribal relatives do it. So thank you for sharing that. Shawn, what are your thoughts as an Indigenous man and leaders, your cultural perspective? How has that been informed and the work you do in conservation?
Well, you know, a lot of what Joel's saying really speaks to the idea of that being the concept of conservation being just an inherent part of who we are as Indigenous people. And one of the things that I can say for sure, coming from outside of philanthropy generally, but also outside of philanthropy as an Indigenous person, is it meant for me not having to unlearn very many bad habits. And that is to say, I had no idea that the way the conservation world viewed conservation generally, the broader conservation world, was the idea that to conserve something, you have to keep human beings completely separate and out of it, which I learned the term fortress conservation once I entered philanthropy. I'd never heard of it before, because of course for us, conservation never meant keeping people separate. It really meant the people treating the land on a daily basis in its interaction with it like a relative, the same way you would do a human family member. That is to say, the same thing we do with people. We take from people and we give to people. We make sure that we're healthy, and we make sure what we take from our human relative isn't so much that they can't exist. We don't mentally exhaust them. We don't emotionally exhaust them. We certainly don't physically exhaust them. We interact with them in a way that's beneficial to both them and us. And I had no idea that the conservation world treated that differently. And so I never had to unlearn that, which meant as we started approaching these concepts or this idea of tribal conservation, it meant really not having to unlearn any bad habits and really getting to inject what are just inherent values that we have into the conservation world in a way that they really had to stand up and listen.
Yeah. Wow. Even I learned something in all of that in how we, just being able to articulate that, right, and that we treat the land like a relative. I think that's just beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Lisa, I want to direct this question to you. So understanding that conservation from the perspective of Indigenous people can be sometimes different than what the philanthropic sector understands it to be. Do you see the trends in the way that foundations are addressing this?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started in philanthropy about, 15, almost maybe 17 years ago, I worked in what was called public lands and wilderness. And, those terms are still used today. Obviously, they mean something. But, primarily focusing in Alaska, I had a wonderful opportunity to learn about what was called TK, right? I mean, there's, like classic foundations, everything has to be an acronym within, seconds, right? So, and there were funders at that time who were integrating those concepts into their work, right? It was maybe alongside traditional quote unquote science, or, so it was not unheard of, in that space, and probably well before I came on the scene, right? Spent a great deal of time working on Arctic issues and trying to really understand, as a funder at that time, how could we change the way we did our work, thinking about, quote unquote metrics differently, right? Foundations, again, love, tools and theories of change and logic models and all sorts of things that, sort of imagine inputs and outputs. And, we were very much engaged in that type of work. So even then, thinking about how could we look at different ways of measuring how conservation works and what are the outcomes that might be different from the traditional philanthropic measures. Spent about 10 years doing some of that work, working alongside a lot of other very progressive and sort of thoughtful leaders in philanthropy. I'm sure some of them are on the call right now, but and then I took a kind of 2.5-3 year hiatus, worked in a different space in an NGO, and I came back and it was like everything had shifted. Everybody was talking about traditional knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, and I think some of it might be just that, these terms and concepts were more popular. The Biden administration was starting to use these terms more. I think I credit NAP and some of the partners there for making sure that, the administration was focused differently on how to do conservation. But I have to say some of my early conversations with funders when I came back to BFG, it was quite amazing at the shifts. I was really, pleased to hear that not only was Indigenous knowledge being integrated, but foundations are really thinking very differently about outcomes and how to engage with tribal nations and tribal organizations. So I think some evidence of that has been, and particularly just in my direct role at BFG, the programs that we put on, including a 3-day meeting in Washington, D.C., the first day we've dedicated to tribal conservation, and that room is packed. So some people are different places in their journey and how they're learning, right? They might be just, first learning about these concepts, but some folks have been in the space for a long, long time. And I feel like not only is the language more sophisticated and evolved, but I really see evidence of how the grants are being made, how people are thinking about partnerships and relationships, and, just frankly, how the funding is going out the door. I don't think we would have gotten such an amazing response to the request to join the Tribal Conservation Pledge 5 years ago. No way, right? I mean, I think this is something that really there is direct evidence that thoughts and beliefs and ways foundations measure their grant making or do their grant making have really changed. So yeah, I think, going forward, at least in my role, bringing more people on the ground, taking people out and doing it in a respectful way, but visiting places that funding is being directed to will help with that. People will understand that it's more complex than, just a grant out the door and hoping that the deliverables get delivered, right? I think once, we can really expand what sort of field visits happen and how people do their learning, that will even become, sort of more evolved and nuanced. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think we can no longer ignore like our responsibility to our natural resources, and that's where those shifts are occurring. And it's almost important that somebody step away from the work and come back to it and see the big changes that are coming. And it's good that we're actually hearing it from people who are in the work, that those changes are coming, because it's been a long time coming. So thank you for that. The next question is directed to Joel. When we talk about shifting power, we also need to understand that people are at different points in their learning and relationship building journeys. Can you share with us what Native Americans in philanthropy is doing to collaborate around the perspectives and needs of tribal nations while supporting the learning journeys of funders?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Steph, and kind of builds on what Lisa was just talking about, because we understand that there are some funders, some foundations who already get this. They, and they've been talking and have building relationships with tribes over last couple of years, and some who are just starting that journey and trying to learn about our individual tribal perspectives on how we caretake for the land and the water and the species and what we've been doing for thousands of years, and the success there. Talk about indigenous knowledge. And so but there's also tribes who are at different levels on this journey as well, particularly with respect to just the relationships and the connections with philanthropy. And so when we went and across Indian country as a NAP team and had listening sessions, we got to hear directly from those tribal communities. We connected them and to understand some base knowledge on how they, if they have any interaction and relationships with foundations, what the barriers to engaging have been, what are their needs and priorities, and how can NAP help to create some bridges between the two communities, and specifically, how can we get more funding and resources on the ground to those communities to do this good work that we've been doing for thousands of years? And so part of that was, reaching out with key partners in the philanthropy field, like Biodiversity Funders Group. They've been a integral part in this strategy. And we, as Lisa said, we just had the meeting in DC a couple weeks ago. Things are happening fast and furious. That was the second meeting that the NAP has co-hosted, the first day of that gathering. And that was very important to bring tribal leadership, tribal nonprofits, tribal community members who can tell the story themselves and connect directly with these foundations, and really talk about not only the successes and the good work we've been doing, like I said, for thousands of years to steward our lands and waters, but also what are the challenges, what are the capacity needs, what are our dreams, our visions that we want to realize to really restore the lands, waters, and our connection to them, as Shawn said. We're an integral part. The human beings are an integral part with this relationship. We are a place-based people. Indigenous people are place-based. We have these, names and stories and that go back, thousands of years. And so we have, a vision of restoring that those ecosystems and our connection to them, which strengthens and restores our way of life, our language, our culture. It's all intertwined. And so to get those stories in front of funders and have those conversations has been key. And actually, that last spring, that was the genesis of our Tribal Conservation Fund and Pledge Collaborative. It was born there, and we've been on that journey since then. And you saw the latest chapter in that journey just 2 days ago out in DC with the White House and Department of Interior making huge announcements on investments in tribal conservation and protection of our sacred places. And then the big announcement of our key partners in philanthropy really coming together, Christensen Fund and Shawn and his team. We're right there at the beginning as key investors and supporters. And so we've gotten a bunch of other friends and colleagues to join this movement. And now, we announced a huge number of over 102 million pledged for this conservation work. And part of that pledge is going to be a learning community. So you talked about various folks on different levels of their journey of understanding tribal conservation, and so we've already had one learning series as part of that collaborative, and we focused on co-stewardship for tribal nations, and focused on we're this is something that is really exciting, because not only our tribes and philanthropy are collaborating in ways they've never done before, but also we have our administration and the key folks, a lot of them tribal members in positions like Secretary Holland and Director of the National Parks Chuck Sams and others. We have a moment in time right now where we're aligning with some huge federal efforts and initiatives with what we're doing in the philanthropic sector, NAP as the glue, and keeping everybody together and convening and coordinating and getting our strategies aligned. It's really a unique and special time right now, and so one big piece of that is as I mentioned, the co-stewardship, and because the tribal nations over the years have a significant amount of our land and water taken away from us, and a lot of that is still in federal federal jurisdiction. We're talking about national parks, we're talking about national forests, BLM land, and we are and all those are ancestral territories. They're all historical ancestral lands of tribes, and where we exercise our all of the rights I talked about, where we go out and we gather huckleberries, we go and gather cedar, we go hunt and we go fish on all these lands. And so we are invested in caretaking of those lands, even though they're in federal hands right now. And so a big piece of restoring the and actually looking at improving the stewardship and conservation of those lands means letting tribes take the lead, and incorporating the knowledge that's been built up over thousands of years and the practices that we've done to restore the balance to these landscapes. And a big piece of that is having tribes steward or co-steward those federal lands. And so that was the first learning series, and we had a great discussion with tribes and with foundations virtually, and we're going to build on that and have a series of learning sessions virtually throughout the years with this collaborative. So we really want to encourage all those who are listening in to learn about our Tribal Conservation Fund and Pledge Collaborative and support this work that tribes are doing. but also to stay, to stay engaged in our community and to keep learning about these issues, do deep dives on these, and learn directly from tribes about these issues.
Yeah. No, I think one thing I always admire about Native Americans in philanthropy, and a lot so lately, is the courage to have the conversations. Because on the other side of those hard conversations, we usually end up with amazing solutions. And so it's just exciting to see that the Tribal Conservation Pledge Fund was like a part of that. So congratulations again, and thank you for sharing. The next question is both for Lisa and Shawn as funders. As we've been talking about this whole time, and we led with it, is there's big opportunities. One of them being the Tribal Conservation Pledge Fund Collaborative. Lisa, can you share with us why this collaborative is important to your organization and how you decided to get involved?
Sure. It seemed like a natural place, honestly. I don't think it really necessarily took a lot of intentional design, right? It was fairly organic because there's so much interest in this space. I will say that, we are all greater than the sum of our parts when we work together on something like this, right? And I think you could see the evidence of that by the White House including the pledge in their announcement yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever that was. So for me, thinking about how funders can actually work together on something that is, not too controversial, right? I mean, it's not something that required a lot of approval for language and messaging, right? That, foundations aren't, necessarily ready to sign on to advocacy statements, but they can sign on to things that share, that pool resources, right? And so I think the leverage from that was really the main value. I think, additionally, as Joel mentioned, the money is just part of it, right? I think the learning together and the building of community is going to be what carries this, and probably in the end has more value, because there's so many questions that funders have, right? Some of them are very, technical and specific, like, can we even fund tribes directly? Okay, well, we can answer those pretty clearly. But they're also, how do you do this work? What are some pitfalls? How did you learn? That to me is the best place for BFG to be in this space, right? To bring funders together and to help them, again, the learning journey, but also to put the questions in front of them that I think I'm hearing from other folks so that they can learn and answer those questions together. So super exciting to me. I just see no end to, sort of the momentum that we are feeling around this. So, oh, and maybe one last note, which is that the sort of first burst of this collaborative ended up doing something that I found to be so amazingly leveraging, which was to provide the cash match for tribes who were applying to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I mean, throughout the last, 2 years, all I've been hearing from funders and grantees has been, how can we get rid of these barriers for tribes to be able to apply for these big government grants, right? And, if you've ever applied for a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, the match can be brutal and the paperwork can be brutal. And so having the opportunity to work with that organization and, streamline, I know that NAP worked very closely with them to, take away a lot of the barriers. And then for funders to come in and say, okay, we're going to just eliminate the cash match for tribes. That to me was such a wonderful collaborative experience. So, yeah.
Wow, that eliminating those matches, gives more options and more tribes to get involved, and that's so critical to the overall solution. So that is so huge. I see it in the everyday work that I do, and almost how those matches were set up to discourage folks, right? And especially people of color or those in economic hardship. So that's an amazing solution. So Shawn, same thing. Can you share why this collaborative is important to your organization and why you all decided to get involved?
Well, so the Christensen Fund, part of the reason this is important to them is because it was NAP and Christensen Fund together's kind of conceptualization. So my very first assignment when I got to Christensen was Carla Fredericks, who's our CEO, saying, "Hey, you got to write the concept note for this." And I said, "What's a concept note?" And because I didn't know what that was, so I had to go find what that meant, and then put this all together and talk with her and Eric about ways that we could design it that would really encourage people to have many options to join, right? Because often you'll have a fund, often you'll have a pledge. We wanted there to be a menu of options for people to be able to participate. And so putting those two things together and really driving what that looked like, explaining in the concept note the importance of how the importance of indigenous knowledge to conservation, the importance of indigenous knowledge to helping the reverse climate change, all those sorts of things. And so, the Christensen Fund only does one thing. We provide funding to support the advancement of the inherent rights, dignity, and self-determination of indigenous people. And so this fund was really important to us because one of the things that we knew coming in was that there is almost no money in philanthropy going to indigenous organizations generally, and whatever small percentage is, which is like 0.41%, going to indigenous organizations, almost zero of that was going directly to tribes. And that's the important piece, because if you're an organization like the Christensen Fund, whose main mission, whose end goal is self-determination for indigenous peoples, that has to mean that the tribes, the indigenous people themselves, are in control, not even indigenous-led organizations, not them. Because if philanthropy is giving their money to indigenous-led organizations, for tribes to participate in that, then tribes have to go to those organizations and, to say it pejoratively, beg for partnerships, beg for the scraps that those organizations have gotten from larger philanthropic organizations. And Carla's philosophy and Christensen's as well was that relationship. If what we're about is self-determination, that relationship has to be flipped. The tribes have to get the money. The indigenous-led organizations then need to go to the tribes to help form partnerships. And so it was really crucial for our entire mission that this fund come into existence. And so that was really what we've been focused on for a year and almost a half now. And for me, it was a great fortune, because the very first people I got to work with in philanthropy were Eric and his team at NAP. I think I talked to Joel like 3 days onto the job, 3 days into the job. Lisa, who has just been a huge emotional and really kind of mentoring kind of support through trying to put all this together. She's got such deep knowledge that it was really helpful. And then, even folks like Sasha at the Doris Duke Foundation, that they've been really kind of helpful in helping me get through, helping me understand philanthropy really quickly, right? Because it's something I had to learn from zero. And so for our organization, this is what we do. We do this and nothing else. We provide funding to support self-determination of indigenous people. So for us, this fund was critical that the U.S. in general and philanthropy as a sector start to recognize that tribes are who are deserving of the funding. As much as we love money going to indigenous-led organization, and lots of Christensen's money does go to indigenous-led organizations, but it's important for the broader philanthropic sector to understand that tribes are who should be getting the first crack at those dollars, and those indigenous-led organizations can come to them for partnerships.
Yeah, I love the idea of funding tribes directly in, because that's where the work is getting done in a lot of ways. So that's wonderful. I think you've spoke to this, Shawn, but I want to go ahead and dig a little deeper here. So we heard Greg talk about shifting power and putting tribes in the driver's seat to lead this conservation work. So from NAP's perspective, the Christensen Fund has been a leader in this. Can you share with us how you built out your grant making specifically to better support tribal nations and indigenous communities?
Well, the Christensen Fund kind of historically has been a biodiversity funder. And what that meant was there was lots of intersection just by the nature of biodiversity with tribal communities or indigenous communities. And that really stems from the fact that of the biodiversity remaining on the planet, about 80% of it exists on the 20% of land stewarded by indigenous people. And you got to kind of ask yourself, well, what's the reason for that? The reason is people who aren't indigenous people have extracted all they can out of most of the land that they steward, including species extinction, biodiversity destruction, right? So the reason so much biodiversity continues to exist on a very small proportion of land stewarded by indigenous people is because by our nature, that's how we interact with the land. And so it was really important for us to build out a program around that kind of concept. So for us, it's not only what we do, but how we do it. So as we've built out our program, it's been almost exclusively on trust-based philanthropy, which for us means providing multi-year and unrestricted grants to tribes, so that, or to the indigenous organizations that we support, so that when they get the funds, they can use them in the way that's going to best support the growth and advancement of the work that they do. And so that means sometimes, we provide funding for them and they need to use it to hire new people, or sometimes they need to use that on a very specific program or to buy supplies for a certain thing. And for us, it is operating under the understanding that indigenous people are super, super good at their jobs when it comes to this, evidenced by those numbers I gave you about the amount of the biodiversity left on the land. So why do anything but trust that they're going to use the money in the way best for them? They've been using almost no money in a way that's produced incredible results for thousands of years now. Imagine what they could do with some money. And so that's how we do it. We make sure that we are giving to indigenous-led organizations and giving to tribes directly and giving to organizations like NAP, and then also making sure that they can use that money in whatever way they decide is best for them.
Thank you. So we always ask our audience to participate. So we have an audience question that's coming in on the chat, and that question is from Christian Weaver. So Christian, thank you for asking the question. It's what policies are in place so that the United States is informed by tribal conservation subject matter experts whose people have done this work for thousands of years. And, I'll just ask the panel, who wants to. Is that you, Joel?
I could take the first crack at it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. Although, this is, so my background has been in policy, obviously, like in tribal politics, elected leadership, and then policy analyst and coordinator. I didn't think there would be that much, to be honest, I didn't think there would be that much policy work in my job here at NAP. But pleasantly, it's been a lot of interaction, like I said, with the administration and supporting these, nation to nation relationships and honoring that. So going back to, some of the comments that Shawn just made about having tribal nations, sovereign nations at the table, and taking that leadership role in stewarding their lands, their waters, their resources, restoring that proper sovereign nation status and the relationship with the federal government is key to accomplishing all this good work on the ground. When you talk about, well, what policies are currently in place to help tribes can have a influence and input into conservation work as a whole across the United States. We have thankfully had some great presidents and administrations who've instilled some consultation requirements within all the agencies, so that when there's any actions, and this covers more than just conservation work, but anything that affects a tribal nation and their lands, waters, and resources, the federal government has an obligation to consult with those tribal nations that are potentially affected. So that's just that's the bare minimum, really, that we demand as tribal nations and sovereign nations. What we would hope, and this is something that organizations that are partnering with NAP have been saying for a long time, like National Congress of American Indians and regional intertribal organizations like the one I work for in the Northwest, have been talking about enhancing that consultation. So it's not just we're going to and because a lot of times that consultation in the past was like after the fact, after a decision was made, after a management action was taken, after an approval of a permit for certain development or extraction or leasing. And so we're trying to shift that so that it's before an action is taken, so early on, prior to, and really in the ultimately we would want what they call free and prior informed consent on any action that affects the tribe and the tribe's land, water, and resources. We're not there yet, but this is, we're in like I said, we're in a moment in time where the administration is supporting our tribal nations in this work, and we have the private sector as well supporting us and building up that knowledge and support. So we right now, there's different levels of congressional authority too, and this is something like that you wouldn't. So a benefit of this partnership between NAP and foundations and bridging the tribal nations and leadership. One specific example was just 2 weeks ago at our BFG gathering, where we took over the first day and made it a tribal day. We brought out not just tribes, but we brought out our allies, our within the administration, and so we brought out an official from USDA, Heather Dawn Thompson, who's been a great leader in this space, and we dove deep into this concept of how the co-stewardship versus co-management, and how tribes can take over more authority for protection of their own lands and waters and resources. And so we got into this the weeds a little bit, but it was needed because even for folks who have been steeped in this for a long time, like myself, I was using management and stewardship interchangeably as terms, and they do not mean the same thing. And it all goes back to the congressional authorization, what their authorities are. And so we're looking to build up tribes, their capacity to get them ready to enter into these agreements with the federal government to take over stewardship of their territories. But we also have a long way to go to enhance that policy. And so we're trying to look at how NAP can support tribes, and not only the getting more philanthropic resources and dollars to them for on the ground projects of restoration and protection, but also to look at how can we enhance policy to even take that further, and to fully honor that nation to nation relationship that tribes have with the federal government, with treaties and with executive orders, and to really respect and kind of repair the damage done, and right some historical wrongs.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Yeah, great answers on the policy. The next question is, this whole effort that just launched on Tuesday was a whole collaborative approach, but just across the board in a lot of sectors, we can all look, we still sometimes work in silos. So I want to ask this question. We sometimes see in the Western conservation efforts that organizations work in silos that focus on specific aspects of conservation work. Most indigenous ecological knowledge, on the other hand, focuses on the interconnectedness of things. In your work, how do you ensure you're bringing the right people together to break down these silos and support the bigger picture of the conversation? And Shawn, if you'll start with that.
Well, that idea of people was in Christian's question before, and I actually wanted to try to answer that a little bit, and it will just dovetail nicely with this answer here, because it's really about people. Joel's gave a great answer about some of the legal structures in existence. Joel's from a treaty tribe, so he knows that legal structures only matter insofar as there are people on the ground willing to actually enforce and follow through on those promises. And so the people part of Christian's question, and of course the people question that you've asked here, is really the critical piece. And that starts with Auntie Deb there in Department of Interior. And by the way, I asked her senior advisor if she knows everyone in Indian country calls her Auntie Deb. And she said not only does she know, but that she loves it. And of course she would, because she understands deeply that that is a term of endearment and respect of far greater reverence coming from us than her formal title. So I really like that she knows and appreciates that. But she has put the right people in place. So Assistant Secretary of the in Indian Affairs Brian Newland is there. Wheezy Penn, Little L. Garriott is there, really spearheading and pushing through initiatives. Tracy Goodluck is doing great job connecting people all over the different organizations, the different agencies of the federal government. And even those folks who are non-Indigenous, like Rachel Brown, are incredible allies. I mean, Rachel Brown was really kind of instrumental in getting NAP's public-private partnership pushed through and then in place in Washington. And Rachel's non-Indigenous, but man, is she awesome and does such great work. And so part of what happens now is we have Indigenous people in this administration, in the different agencies, and it's not just Interior, fortunately. Like we've got folks like Chuck Sams at National Parks, Zach Ducheneau I believe at USDA. Like we've got people in all kinds of different parts of the agency that understand how to do this and are really strong and just incredibly sharp voices for being able to articulate our ideas, our concepts in a way that speak to folks who might not otherwise get it, right? So they can speak the Washington lingo, and they can also sort of speak to Indigenous peoples as well. And so it really, and what that means is they can be the liaison between the people who we need to get it to enforce policies and the people who have the knowledge on the ground, the Indigenous people from the tribal leaders down to people working in different tribal agencies and environmental protection or environment agencies and tribes and so forth. They can be that liaison to make sure that all that different Indigenous knowledge is translating across agencies and across the void. And one of the things that's happening now is there are all kinds of initiatives now going on where Indigenous knowledge and Western science are being fused in a way that the kind of fortress conservation we were talking about before is really starting to wither a little bit, because these folks who I've been talking about before have been able to articulate the importance and the kind of deep effectiveness of Indigenous knowledge in conservation in such a way that now the field is just completely changing, and it's changing rapidly. And thank goodness, because what Joel said before is right, which is that we are in an extremely fortunate time, which is where the US's interests and tribal interests are almost perfectly aligned when it comes to conservation and when it comes to the environment. That almost never happens. And so it's critical that we take advantage of that in this however short this window is, to do as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. Lisa, what are your thoughts on bringing the right people together to break down the silos?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned all of those amazing folks in the administration, right? I think that's going to go a long way to weaving together that are not arbitrary. I mean, look, the government has their boxes, right? Of course, they're going to have, different agencies have different mandates and require different specialties. But I think for me, a lot of this could be, maybe loosened up a little bit if philanthropy could also mimic some of these changes, right? I think, again, similarly, when you're in a foundation, you have your title, you have your department, it might be climate, it might be conservation, it might be a geography, for instance. But I think, the more that those barriers can be blended, I think the more we're going to see some of these holistic solutions and strategies. BFG can go a long way to help with that, right? I think one of the things I'm looking forward to doing is working with my climate colleague. Yes, we actually have 2 silos even within BFG. So trying to break some of those down and thinking about issues that we can address together and bring forward to funders together. There are some natural ones, right? I think there are places where when you think about, renewables and energy siting, those issues cross, lots of different issue areas. So folks will have different ways that they can collaborate around that. I think it's just hard because, you work toward goals and somehow they get very narrow, right? And so it's hard to sometimes look up and say, okay, is this language even making sense anymore, right? Am I so focused on this sort of singular goal or strategy that I sort of forgotten about the bigger picture, the bigger landscape? So again, I'm looking forward to working with NAP to sort of button some of that. And I think also I hear a lot from Philanthropy that they're, eager to bring in other colleagues or sort of share things across their foundations if they have other departments. So yeah, I'm excited about this. I think, again, as you look towards solutions, and particularly echoing what Shawn said, like we have a very short time with, we hope we have longer, but right now there's a wonderful opportunity to get some stuff done in a very short period of time. And so if we can think about those end goals in the most holistic way we can, I think we're going to see greater success.
Thank you. Joel, your thoughts on bringing people together in philanthropy and removing silos?
Yeah, I can add on a little bit, and then I'd like to just make another comment. But yeah, that's silos exist across all these sectors. I mean, in tribal government, we got our own silos, and so I guess it wasn't a big surprise when I came into philanthropy to see all those silos that kind of Lisa mentioned. The climate funders and the ocean funders and you got the water funders, right? We're freshwater, and then you have the biodiversity funders and the conservation funders, and we're like, and I'm trying to learn this like landscape and understand, well, who are the players and who do I need to talk to, and it was just like, why don't we get everybody in the same room? Because tribes do not see it that way, even though we have our silos with our programs and whatnot. But I mean, as far as like looking at how to conserve the land, water, and resources, and protect them and restore them for future generations, all those silos that we talked about, they don't exist in that sort of indigenous perspective on this work. And so bringing together, and I think it's just the beginning. We've invited more folks to attend the webinars we've had, the BFG. I'm trying to bring in the climate discussions as well, and looking at where NAP's role is as a convener. I think is going to be super important. And so we are making progress in that space. These silos have been built up for decades and decades, so it's going to be difficult work, but we're committed to doing that. But I'd like to comment on a point that Lisa and Shawn were making with regards to the public-private partnerships. And so this is so we're looking at and we signed an MOU with Department of Interior, which was this has all come together within little over a year, just about a year of work where things are really aligning, and we have to take advantage of this window, and hopefully it's going to be a bigger window, fingers crossed. But we have to take advantage of the willingness to collaborate, the willingness to partner, and make that long-term and sustainable. So we have actually we just had the public the Office of Strategic Partnership within Department of Interior created. We just hired the two staffers. So they started they started this week, and their second day was out in DC for Conservation Action Day and the big announcement of the investment of $102 million in tribally led conservation work. So they had a great, they're having a great first week. But they're going to be key and integral in looking at all the federal funding opportunities and how philanthropy can leverage their private dollars to open up more access to federal dollars for tribes. And one big example of that, and Lisa mentioned it, was we utilized our Tribal Conservation Fund. So we utilized all the investments from Christensen Fund and Doris Duke and Hewlett and all of our awesome partners. We utilized those investments to cover the non-federal cash match as a part of the America the Beautiful Challenge program. It's a federal program, a new program that came down, aligned with President Biden's 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of the waters and lands of the U.S. by 2030. Huge goal. And the only way that goal can be accomplished is if you partner with tribes, and tribes lead on this conservation work in our territories. We have significant amount of land and water that we have either stewardship or co-stewardship over, and hopefully increasing that. But that is going to be key in accomplishing that conservation goal. And so this is the feedback we've been getting from tribes, is that they want to participate in more and more of these programs, but they just didn't have the capacity. It goes down to just the bare bones of a grant writer, of folks who are in the field with the knowledge, but not understanding the intricacies of a new grant program, with all the criteria and the metrics and all that goes into it. And so we partnered with Native Americans, Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, a key leader in across Indian country in this space, to provide that technical assistance to tribes, to walk them through that grant. And then in these weekly webinars, we've heard back from the tribes that man, this 3% cash match is prohibitive. The grants were upwards of 5 million potentially each, and so that's a big chunk of change that majority of the tribes across Indian country cannot afford. And so we took that feedback to NAP, our team, and crunched the numbers and looked at all the initial investment. This is before the big 102 million announcement. This is the initial partners like Christensen Fund, and Shawn and his team. And so we said we have enough already invested in this, in our tribal conservation fund, that we can cover the match. And so when we relayed that out to all the tribes, it just caused so much excitement. And the tremendous amount of tribes to apply for the America the Beautiful grant was overwhelming. We had over 133 tribes apply for that, for the America the Beautiful Challenge grant, and we were successful in collectively getting 14 tribes funded the first year. So we leveraged around $800,000 of private philanthropic funds to cover the match for those 14 tribes. And it opened up $26.5 million of conservation grants through the America the Beautiful Challenge. And this covers like salmon restoration, buffalo restoration, forest work, grasslands work, all across the country. And so we're building upon that success of the America the Beautiful Challenge year one, and just trying to replicate that in years 2 and year 3 of the program. It's only going to grow. We want more and more tribes to benefit and get access to those federal funds. But we're also looking at that public-private partnership to be used as a model in maybe other programs that National Fish and Wildlife Foundation operate. NFWF has over 60 programs, and they're huge, and they have very little interaction or participation from tribes in, say, the Coastal Resiliency Fund or the Great Plains program. But all these, there's tribes who are suffering from climate change impacts on the coast, and are trying to restore their ecosystems and their connection to keystone species like buffalo. And I appreciate this. Kind of ties it back to the breaking down silos, because you have so like natural climate solutions, right? Like bringing back the bison, putting them back in the landscape, restoring that connection obviously is super important. Like for my tribe, Nez Perce tribe, we're super fortunate, because we're not only are we salmon people, but we're buffalo people. We're like right there at the Columbia Plateau. So we lost that connection with the bison. They were intentionally wiped out almost completely. And so we're trying to restore them, to provide that connection, that reinforces our culture, our health, physical, spiritual health. but it also restores the health of the earth, of these grasslands. And so we're looking at how, that the positive impacts to the climate are also positive impacts for conservation of species and landscapes, and restoration of tribes and their ways of life. So I think there's a lot of instances where these goals are shared, and where there's multiple benefits across all these different silos. So that's why we're trying to break them down.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. I'd like to encourage our audience to share in the live chat any questions you might have of our panelists. And if we can, we'll get to as many as possible. Moving on to the next question. For Indigenous communities, especially sovereign tribal nations, trust-based giving is important because it supports operating in ways that align with each community's cultural beliefs. What would you say to your peers and colleagues in the sector about moving in this direction? And I'll direct that question to Lisa first.
That's a challenging question. I mean, actually, I wonder, can I kick this one to Joel or Shawn? I feel like I'm going to have the space to answer that, right? Thank you.
That's all right.
I'll take it. Yeah. So, it's like this question was designed for me because as that team can tell you, and probably Lisa too, because we've been on so many panels together at this point. I say every panel that I'm on, even if it's unrelated to what I'm about to say, I say it anyway, which is, at this point, we're very fortunate that a lot of philanthropy seems to be interested in funding Indigenous peoples for many things, beyond conservation and climate change and environment. And we're really fortunate that shift is starting to be made. So the next piece is this. If anyone is in support of Indigenous people, if they want to be in the business of supporting Indigenous peoples, you have to support self-determination. Anything short of full support for self-determination is just colonial subjugation disguised as charity. And so what that means is if you're supporting Indigenous people, you have to support self-determination, and you cannot say you're supporting self-determination and then attach strings to how the money gets used. Those two things are antithetical to one another. You have to allow Indigenous peoples, whether that's the tribes themselves or the Indigenous-led organizations, to decide for themselves how they're using the money that they get. They understand their work the best. They understand their values the best. And therefore, any philanthropic organization giving to Indigenous peoples has to do it in an unrestricted way. Anything short of that, I will say one more time, is just colonial subjugation disguised as charity. It's worse than not giving at all, frankly. And so I'm sure tribes don't want me to say that, and Indigenous-led organizations don't want me to say that, because that might decrease the amount of dollars flowing our way. But let's be clear, any progress we're going to make on this front has to come from a place of truth, and that is the truth.
Yeah, that's powerful, Shawn. Thank you. Joel?
I'll just echo what Shawn said. That we've been hearing that from tribes when we do the outreach and our listening sessions all across Indian country, is that they didn't have very many of tribes didn't have a relationship with philanthropy and funders. Okay, that was the first thing. So how do we reverse that and create more meaningful relationships? And then what are those meaningful relationships? And they go to those points. It's fully trusting the tribes and investing in them long term, and not putting strings attached to them. Specifically in this space of conservation, we have a proven track record, right? We have thousands of years of stewardship of all these lands, waters, and resources, and we did a pretty good job. And so trust us now when we're trying to reestablish our leadership in this new landscape with the checkerboard nature of land ownership with federal, state, private, and tribal lands. This landscape of multiple funding streams. we're asking that these relationships are not just superficial. That the funding isn't just like one off, and that it's truly guided and led by tribal nations and their priorities. So, in the past, it had been more of a case of an individual funder having a focus area, say, forests, and I really want to protect old growth forests. And this is my plan, from a funder's perspective. This is my plan. I have a solution, and then they go and then they give money to a particular indigenous organization or tribe. Actually, that's probably not the case. They probably gave it to an NGO, a big green NGO to do that work, and then they would go into that tribal territory, plop down with their solution, and try to make positive impact. That is completely the wrong way to do things. You should go to the tribes first, who have always been caretakers of those lands and resources. Ask them, why has that been so successful in the past? You incorporating their indigenous knowledge and asking them, what is your long-term plan for continuing that work? And so we're doing that at NAP by the creation of our Tribal Conservation Fund and Pledge, where we're going to direct dollars directly to tribal nations. But it's also in how that program was formulated, and now it's going to be guided, and that's through our tribal leader advisors. So we have a core group of 10 tribal leaders from across Indian country who are defining what this indigenous conservation is, and what mechanisms there are to get those resources directly to tribes to do the work that they've always done, but also to help build capacity with our intertribal partners, our indigenous-led organizations, so they can provide that framework of support, so that this is like long-term sustainable. So those relationships with funders and this came up at our biodiversity funders group meeting a couple of weeks ago, where we had really powerful speakers emphasizing that point of we've been doing this for thousands of years, so we shouldn't have to keep proving ourselves. We shouldn't have to be. You should trust us and know that this is going to be an ongoing initiative that's going to span multiple generations into the future, that we're always going to be here. So this work, we're fully invested in it. Trust us, fund us without any strings attached, so that the tribes can actually have the leadership role in guiding that programming.
Yeah, thank you. I want to circle back to Lisa and see if she wants to offer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad. Thank you both for sort of hitting the philosophical part of that question, right? And I guess I could say, as somebody who helps develop the practices for the more the practitioner level answer here, which is to say, go and visit. Go to the place that you are hoping to, conserve, protect, restore, steward, right? I mean, I think that is the biggest thing that you can do to, sand down the edges of what can be kind of a challenging, sort of leap of faith, right? Obviously, you want to do that in a good way. You want to be respectful to who you're visiting, make sure you're invited, all of those things. Don't put strains on the communities. But to me, that's one of the best ways to get to that trust, right? We all know that relationships in this world are absolutely essential. And I think nowhere than in this space is that most critical. So, that's something that BFG and NAP are working on together. We'll have, places that people can come and visit, and we'll have that sort of set up as a way to learn more. I think, the other thing I would say is the leaps of faith, just, take them, right? There's some things you're not always going to know the final outcome. And I think that's true in funding green NGOs too, right? There's nothing different about how these bets are made with grants, right? There's always going to be risk. And I would say, just think about that risk as a way to have a big reward. So yeah, thanks for letting me have a minute there.
Oh, no, thank you so much. So one of the things that Lisa mentioned, like, what's one thing that funders can do? And I think she said, go visit. So I'd like to also direct this to Joel and Shawn. In your experience, what is one change that funders can make right now to build that better relationship with tribal nations?
Well, I'll take the next crack at it. So it builds on what Lisa said, and that's just first off, it's listening. It's listening and really respecting tribal viewpoints and perspectives on this, and taking a step back from the prior kind of role that funders have had on guiding it, and letting tribes take the lead. You know, and to do that. Invest in our conservation fund and pledge collaborative. I mean, this is something that has, so not only have we already opened up many doors, federal funding doors, through our public-private partnerships and work with America the Beautiful Challenge, but we're developing more and more relationships and partnerships to build up capacity for tribes, to have access to more and more co-stewardship agreements. This is a vehicle, a platform that's going to open up more and more opportunities for tribes to take the lead in restoring and protecting the homelands that they hold dear, and to really continue this movement. So it is a huge movement. We want everybody to join, and to get those resources directly to tribes to do this work. But also, as was mentioned, you know, it's a community, and so it's an ongoing conversation, a learning together. We're learning from the funders as well, and so it's a two-way street where we want to be truly partnered with you. And so this is a great opportunity for those who are thinking about investing and partnering with Indian country and tribes. This is something that's been already proven successful, and it's just, you know, in the first couple steps of this journey with the Conservation Fund and Pledge Collaborative, and we want you to get on that journey with us and join us in this effort, because it truly is transformational. Like I said, it's restoring and correcting some historical wrongs, and really elevating tribes to the rightful place that we've always had, and protecting and being the first stewards, and really taking care of these resources that are going to benefit everybody into the future.
Yeah, excellent call to action there, Joel, with asking people to join the pledge. Thanks for sharing that. Shawn, what's one thing that your colleagues can support?
So take risks. Lisa talked about risk just a minute ago. And one thing I can say is at the annual BFG meeting last year, so Lisa may remember this, I got the chance to sit on the bus right next to a person from a huge foundation. I mean, massive. And he was the president of the foundation. And one of the things that he told me, I just found super profound. He said his board told him that if some of these grants he's making don't fail, then that means he's not taking enough risk to justify them having him be the president of that organization, which I found just deeply profound. And I will say this, to dovetail with Joel's point, if an organization doesn't already have a relationship with tribal communities, whether in the US or abroad, and wants to develop that relationship, jump into the tribal fund, not the pledge. Like if you don't already have a relationship with Indian country, the pledge is actually the harder thing to join, because that means you're making those grants yourself, and then developing those relationships takes time, and developing the trust, not only for you to trust the tribe that you might be working with, but for them to trust you, that takes time. You have to have people who have developed that relationship already. So if you're interested in getting in, jump into the fund itself. And there are two really good reasons to do that. First is that you get to be part of the learning community. So Lisa's convening Knapp and the rest of us who are in the fund and experts in the field constantly to share learning and share experiences and really give people great guidance from a truly on the ground insider point of view of how to do this. So that's a great opportunity to learn if you don't know enough or you don't have relationships in Indian country already. And the second reason to do that is when Joel talked about Knapp using only $800,000 to get $27 million out of federal dollars, that is a multiplier of 33, meaning for every $1 Knapp put in to these tribal communities, the federal government put in $33. If you are a philanthropic organization, and whether you're a mid-size like the Christensen Fund or much smaller like our friends at J.M. Kaplan or much, much, much bigger like our friends at Doris Duke or Hewlett, no matter what, you want your dollars to be effective. And so if you can say to yourself and to your board, hey, we're going to put in $1, and every $1 we put in, the federal government is going to give us somewhere between $33 and $100. That what a great way to say you're using your money, on top of the fact that it's going to tribal communities, indigenous peoples, who again have proven themselves to be far more effective than traditional Western conservation folks at actually getting the job done.
Yeah, thanks. We're getting near time, and I just want to thank you. It's been an honor to moderate the panel and for you all to share your wisdom and your insight and ways to really support your colleagues that will then support the work being done in Indian country. That is always good for everybody, all our relatives. So certainly appreciate it. Thank you, each and every one of you. May you continue to do the amazing work and create those collaborations. So thank you so very much. I want to invite Greg Maston from Native Americans and Philanthropy to close us out.
Thank you so much, Steph. In Yurok, we say waklau, which is much deeper than just thank you. It's truly grateful. I'm truly grateful to you for moderating today, to all of our panelists for sharing such amazing insights. I mean, all I can say is, wow, there were so many amazing thoughts that were shared today. So thank you, Joel and Shawn and Lisa, and thank you, Sam, and your team for helping to put all of this together. I want to make sure we acknowledge as well our leader, Eric Stegman, the CEO of Knapp here, who had the vision to embrace this and really help get us on this path of intersecting in this philanthropy world, this acceptance about a tribally led perspective and worldviews. And as you heard today, these are exciting times. You know, we haven't seen this before quite like this level of support. And we're really trying to take a comprehensive approach in bringing all these different groups together and break down some of these silos. So bringing our partners together from the government sector, from the philanthropy sector, from our native serving organizations, to our intertribal organizations, and really to huddle around and support the work that tribes have been doing for a long time. And the work that they do, it makes this work better. They can do things that other organizations can't do because of their tribal sovereignty, because of their trust obligations. They can drive policy, they can protect lands in different ways. So by us coming together and working together, we can really strengthen this whole body of work and have a better tomorrow. You know, you heard about the unique partnership we did today with NIFWIF. You've heard about the public-private partnerships. You've heard about the alignment with the America the Beautiful. And you've heard about the importance of why we formed the pledge and the fund in the way that we did. So for those of you that don't have those relationships yet, but you want to support this work, we have a fund that you can join and support. And for those of you that already have these relationships in place, or your processes are more aligned with you doing direct funding, then we encourage you to join the pledge. And there's a lot of reasons for you to join the pledge too, in terms of our support and working with you and learning and growing together. And mostly, I really wanted to just emphasize what we heard today, this deep theme that Native peoples, we've always been here as caretakers and stewards of this land. We have a responsibility to God, our creator. We have a responsibility to our ancestors, to our current generation, and to our future generations. So I hope today that you heard that we're going to continue to be here, and we welcome partnerships, and we want to work with you all for a better tomorrow and for a greener tomorrow. So thank you all so much. We'll look forward to the next session that this education series will have, and it will be focused on healing our lands. And it's been on the site here. It's actually there right now. If you want to learn more about this and join this pledge or fund, or just learn more about this body of work and how to work with tribal nations, we encourage you to go to the nativephilanthropy.org. So tribes.nativephilanthropy.org is what you want to go to. Walk loud. Thank you all for joining us today.